Game day challenges are great as well because you can get really specific and individual with challenges. It might be that, we just want you to create 3 or 4 successful passes in this quarter or half, however the game's broken up. Whereas for somebody else, it might be we want you to be really brave and beat a player 3 times or whatever that might look like.
And what can a coach do to help players improve in the areas that they need to?
I think a big thing is these days is, can coaches work with players on like a development plan? So, what's that player's journey? So you might set out at the start of the season and, look at that player. You could even phrase it around the 6 capabilities and, their movement needs to get better. So how do you put together a plan to work with that player to improve over the next 6 weeks? So you're putting in like a development plan for certain individuals, yeah.
Yeah, and I think on that it's really, really important to sort of set targets for players and allow players to have sort of ownership of that as well and ownership of their development, and you can support them with that because learning is going to be accelerated if they've got something to go after, if they know what they're working on and have some ideas around what you want to see from them as a coach and how you can support them. That's going to help them to get better quicker and with more focus. So yeah, sort of setting smart targets and bringing targets into training but also into games as well. It's a great opportunity to set individualised small targets within a game that link to the areas that you want your players to develop in, and that's just sort of some real quick and easy wins that you can do to help support players' development.
Says how well has that been received?
Yeah, I think from my experience it's been really, really well received because it shows that real care and interest in an individual player rather than just sort of facilitating football for a group of people. It starts to become individualised, and so yeah, my experience has been really positive with sort of development plans and targets, and also the opportunity for you to really get to understand the individual player and where their strengths and areas of development lie. And once you understand that, you can then start to be really mindful about your practices, whether it's a training block, whether you're going off a block of work that you're working on certain things in, out of possession, in transition, and whether you're going to focus then on individual areas that will hit a certain amount of players. Development plans can help you identify a range of things within a team where you might have 5 or 6 that have common things that want to work on, so that can help you again shape your scheme of work, shape your blocks that you're working on, shape the individual sessions that you're doing. And I guess almost then for me we kind of sort of think of it almost like a darts board, that all of our players at some point of the season are going to spend quality time in the bullseye, but sometimes they might be on the outer ring and others are in the bullseye, and that kind of making sure that everybody gets real quality time in the bullseye to work on the stuff that they need to improve on is really, really important.
No, I agree. I've done it back at club where we have like individual one-on-ones with players and they get to set their own targets, but like Adam says, you're personally talking to this player so they actually feel valued and feel like you're taking an interest, so that player care. But also it works well for if you've got a group of players, 5 or 6 players that want to work on receiving skills to play forwards, you can constrain your session design. So we've done it back at club where we're quite fortunate, we've got a couple of coaches, so we'll break into units. So 5 or 6 players will work on this, 5 or 6 players will work on this. So players are actually getting time to develop their self as an individual.
How can you help develop players to improve technically?
I think in terms of technical improvement is just lots and lots of opportunity to practice things. So first and foremost, giving them the tools, as we mentioned earlier, in terms of them understanding what are the techniques and then how to carry those techniques out. But once we've done that, is giving them loads of opportunities to practice, get stuff wrong, make mistakes, learn through doing. And then with the support of the coach to sort of correct and support them if they need it. So yeah, just lots of opportunity to practice and try and fail and learn.
I think it might, for a coach to put together like a curriculum, so it might be that every 2 weeks they work on a different skill and a different technique, so players get the opportunity to work on dribbling, to work on passing, to work on receiving, to work on turning, so those techniques.
Now, psychologically?
I think for me, psychologically, the biggest thing is sort of providing an environment that is safe for players, that they feel supported, that they feel encouraged to make mistakes and learn. And yeah, it's just you've got to really be consistent and practice what you preach in that, because you can kind of undo a lot of hard work with a sort of harsh criticism or criticising somebody for trying something new. It's a lot harder to undo that than it is to sort of set an environment, like I say, where players are encouraged to make mistakes. And again, we spoke earlier on, we want players to be problem solvers and we want them to be creative. So I think encouraging a growth mindset where we really encourage and value failure and reframe that as an opportunity, as an exciting opportunity, as a challenge to, if something's not working, this is great. It's really exciting because it gives me the opportunity to try a load of new things to see if I can get it to work, and rather than being sort of down and defeatist or upset that something's not working. So yeah, for me, that sort of psychological safety piece and encouraging a growth mindset is really important.
How do you, in practice design, help players to improve, but maybe on their own levels? You mentioned there that there's some that may be forging ahead and some that maybe aren't really up to scratch. How do you actually manage to get that balance where they both improving, albeit at different levels?
Yeah, I think it is probably one of the most difficult things to do in coaching, especially at grassroots. If you have a wide range of abilities in a team, like differentiation is really, really difficult. So it's starting to think about subtle ways that aren't really obvious to the players as well, of course, of adapting your sessions to maybe match players up with other players. If we're doing some 1v1 work, 2v1 work, can we look at matching players up of similar skill levels to stretch and challenge them? Can we look at adapting sessions to give more success with their outcomes for players who perhaps need a bit more development, a bit more work? Can we put players that are, need some more time to acquire the basic skill? Can we put them in overloaded teams so they've got more time and skill and less pressure? For those players that need stretching, can we put them in underloaded teams where there's higher pressure, higher challenge? Can we do little drive-by comments to players where we say, I'd really like to see you in the next 5 minutes do X, Y or Z? And that might just be an individual challenge for that player that's still within the same practice as everybody else, but it gives them a focus and something extra you want them to do. As Shiv mentioned then, those sort of game day challenges are great as well, because you can get really specific and individual with challenges. It might be that, we just want you to create 3 or 4 successful passes in this quarter or half, however the game's broken up. Whereas for somebody else, it might be we want you to be really brave and beat a player 3 times or whatever that might look like. So it's just really individualised and being mindful that framing what success looks like is going to be very, very different across that group of players, and celebrating those successes, whether it is, beating a player 5 times or whether it's actually just making 2 passes, like that's still success, but framing it as success to those individual players.
How can coaches help players to develop so they can cope in the game now and fall in love with it to prevent them from dropping out in the future?
Yeah, I think again that's the biggest thing is football. Obviously, you want players to improve, you want them to get better, and you want to push and challenge them and stretch them. But if they fall out of love with the game, they're going to leave. And the minute football stops becoming fun and stops becoming enjoyable, you're going to lose kids and they're going to drop out. As kids get older, in both the female and the male game, there's higher dropouts in those sort of GCSE years and where there's external pressures and lots of stuff going on. So can we make sure that football is that safe, enjoyable space that allows them to be active, allows them to be physical, allows them to be competitive, but have fun and enjoy it? And I think that's really the fundamental of it. Even it'd be easy to forget that this doesn't happen at top levels. Serena Wiegmann across the Euros, she spoke so much about, even at that elite level of the game, the focus for her is that the players are enjoying it and having fun, and that's the top of the game. And it's European champions that still have a focus on enjoyment and fun. So that I think that's a massive lesson to everybody to keep the game enjoyable.
I think like a big part to remember is that most of us are working with players that have got potential, but the majority probably are there because they socially like it and they want to engage with friends. So like Ad says, is making the session fun, but also giving them equal opportunity. So playing in different positions, ball rolling time, they're not always sub. So yeah, making players feel valued really, rather than they're always on the bench, they only get 10 minutes, and that's when players will start to fall out in love with the game, and that's when they drop out really, when it becomes maybe too competitive for them, and when they do get to that 15, 16, does it become embarrassing? So I think as coaches is just giving players equal opportunity to enjoy the game.